The clink of crystal against polished marble echoed through the hotel lobby as I walked out, clutching the tiny velvet pouch that had once carried my grandmother's jewelry. My hands trembled, not from the weight, it was gone now, but from the ache of what I had just done. Every necklace, every earring, every gold bracelet I had cherished. Sold. $9,000. Gone in an instant. Before we begin, drop a comment and tell us, where are you from and from which city you're watching our videos? And after watching the whole video, don't forget to tell us what would you do in this situation. Be honest. Tell me in the comments below. We read every comment. Let's begin. Dad needs this trip, my mother had said, her voice sharp over the phone a week earlier. It's an emergency. He's not well. Don't you care about your father? And I, desperate to hold on to the thin threads of respect in a family that never truly valued me, had caved. I wired the money, praying it wasn't too late for whatever medical help they claimed he needed abroad. But as I sat in my car outside the pawn shop, staring at my reflection in the windshield, something gnawed at me. The story hadn't added up. The urgency. The sudden silence after I sent the money. Dad hadn't even called to say thank you. My brother, Connor, had smirked on our last call, his smug laugh ringing in my ears. Guess some of us just know how to get what we want. Weeks later, my suspicion bled into rage when a notification popped up on my phone. A tagged photo on social media. My father, my brother, my mother. All standing on the deck of a massive cruise ship, champagne flutes raised high, confetti bursting around them. The caption read, "Happy birthday, Connor. To the best son ever. Cheers to the future." My chest tightened. The emergency trip was a lie. They hadn't been struggling. They hadn't been worried about Dad's health. They had been celebrating my brother in luxury while I sat at home, stripped of the only heirlooms I had left. I wanted to scream, but my silence cut deeper. Instead of confronting them immediately, I tucked my fury away, sharpened it like a blade, and waited. Because when the time came, my revenge wouldn't be a fight. It would be a show. 2 months later, I stood on the balcony of the same cruise, line they had bragged about, except this time, it wasn't their party. It was mine. My husband, Ethan, calm, calculating, successful, slid his hand into mine, pressing a glass of sparkling wine into my palm. The hum of music drifted up from the lower decks where our guests laughed and danced. And then it happened. I heard voices below, sharp and venomous. My family. The ones who had lied, who had stolen, who had mocked me as naive and gullible. They were at the pier, demanding entry, shouting at the staff that they belonged here. I lifted my glass, slowly, my eyes burning with a mixture of pain and satisfaction. My husband leaned close, his whisper steady in my ear. They're locked out, just like you planned. I turned to face the chaos, their figures small below as security blocked their way. My mother's voice screeched in desperation. My father pounded the railing. Connor raged like a spoiled child. And me? I raised my glass high, silent and unbothered, as the ship's horn echoed across the water. From that balcony, I wasn't just their daughter or their sister. I was the woman they had underestimated, the one who had finally learned the cost of silence. And tonight, silence was my sweetest revenge. The night air was warm, laced with salt and the distant hum of the engines. Madison Carter leaned against the balcony rail, her silk dress catching the glow of the deck lights as if the entire ship had bent to spotlight her. She held her glass high, her jaw set. Below, her family's voices carried, sharp enough to slice through the music. "Let us in. Do you know who we are?" Robert Carter's voice bellowed, his fists slamming against the check-in counter. He had always believed anger could buy him access. Beside him, Linda waved her hands wildly at the cruise staff. "This is a mistake. My husband is an important man. My son deserves to be on board. We have connections." Connor, dressed in designer clothes Madison knew were bought with money she'd unknowingly funded, barked, "This is my event, not hers." She doesn't belong here. But every word seemed to bounce back at them like an echo off stone. Security stood their ground, arms folded, professional but unmoving. On the balcony, Madison took a slow sip, letting the cold bubbles fizz against her tongue. Her husband, Ethan, stood at her side, tall and composed, his presence a quiet fortress. "You don't need to go down there," he murmured. "They're trapped outside their own lies." Her chest burned with a cocktail of fury and vindication. Weeks of humiliation had led to this moment. Their betrayal, their laughter, their smug posts online flaunting the birthday cruise she had unknowingly paid for. They had mocked her silence, thinking it weakness. Tonight they would learn it was strength. Her friend Claire, one of the guests, approached with curiosity. "Madison, are those your parents?" she whispered, her eyes darting to the commotion below. Madison didn't flinch. "They were," she said simply. "Not anymore." The words rolled out sharper than she expected, but they felt right. For years she had been the backup plan, the afterthought, the one her family treated as disposable. She sold heirlooms that meant the world to her for their lies, and they didn't even blink. Ethan clinked his glass gently against hers. "To new beginnings," he said softly, his eyes locked on hers, unwavering. Down below, Robert's voice broke again, but this time with desperation. "Madison! Honey, you can't leave us out here. We're family." The word family sliced through her, a reminder of every guilt trip, every manipulation. She tightened her grip on the rail and leaned forward slightly, just enough for her father's eyes to catch her silhouette in the glow of the deck lights. His face froze. His jaw fell slack. Linda turned too, and for a second her shrill protests fell silent. Connor spun around, spotting Madison in the very place they had tried to erase her from. The balcony. The host's balcony. The one reserved only for the couple funding the cruise. Shock rippled across their faces, disbelief twisting into rage. "You?" Connor shouted upward, his voice breaking. "You don't deserve this! You don't even belong here!" Madison's lips curled into a faint smile, not mocking but final. She raised her glass higher, her posture straight and unshaken. She didn't shout back. She didn't need to. Her silence was louder than every insult they had ever thrown at her. The ship horn blasted, drowning out their screams. The crowd of guests behind Madison cheered, oblivious to the storm unraveling on the pier. Music surged louder, waiters passed trays of sparkling drinks, and laughter echoed across the deck. The world moved forward, with or without her family. Ethan's hand brushed against hers, steady and grounding. "They're outside looking in," he said quietly. "Exactly where they put you all your life. Tonight, you finally chose yourself." Madison's throat tightened, but she didn't cry. Not here, not now. Instead, she inhaled deeply, the ocean air filling her lungs, cleansing her of years of guilt. Her family's shouts grew smaller as the cruise staff escorted them further away from the entrance. Her glass caught the moonlight as she took another sip, her voice low but steady. "I sold my past for them," she whispered almost to herself. "And they used it to erase me, but now they'll watch me write my own future." And with that, Madison turned her back to the chaos, stepping fully into the glow of the ballroom where her new life, her chosen family, her husband, her freedom, waited with open arms. The ballroom lights shimmered in golden arcs as Madison Carter stepped inside, the bass of the music thumping against the polished floor. Laughter spilled from every corner, guests swirling in gowns and tuxedos. Oblivious to the storm that had erupted at the pier, she forced herself to focus on the clink of glasses, the hum of chatter, Ethan's steady presence at her side. But the faint echoes of her family's shouts outside refused to fade. "They'll try again," Ethan said, his voice low but certain. "They always do. They'll come crawling back when the lies stop working." Madison exhaled sharply. "And this time, I won't be their scapegoat." Her resolve had never felt sharper, but beneath it, old wounds throbbed. She remembered being 15, overhearing her mother whisper, "Connor is the pride of this family. Madison's, well, she's sweet, but she'll never shine." Every sacrifice since then had been another brick in the wall they built around her. And tonight, she was finally tearing it down. The music paused as the MC announced, "Please raise your glasses for our host, Madison Carter." All eyes turned to her. For the first time in her life, she wasn't standing in someone else's shadow. Her pulse pounded in her ears, but her voice rang clear as she lifted her glass. "Tonight isn't about the past," she said. "It's about gratitude. For friends who show up. For people who choose you, not because they have to, but because they want to." Cheers erupted, glasses clinked, and Madison felt something unfamiliar but powerful, pride in herself. But then, just as the band struck up again, the ballroom doors swung open. Robert, Linda, Connor. Somehow, they'd slipped past security. Their presence crashed through the celebration like a storm cloud over sunlight. Conversations faltered. The music stumbled to a halt. "Madison!" Linda cried out, her voice trembling, but not from shame, rather from entitlement. "Honey, we need to talk." The crowd shifted uneasily. Ethan stepped forward, shielding Madison with a protective hand at her back. "This is a private event," he said evenly, his voice carrying authority. "You need to leave." Robert's face reddened. "You think you can cut us out like this? We're your blood. That money you gave us, you owe it to this family. Without you, we wouldn't have celebrated Connor's birthday the way he deserved." Gasps rippled across the room. Some guests turned to each other in disbelief. Madison's chest tightened, but instead of shrinking, she stood taller. "You mean the money I gave up my grandmother's jewelry for?" she said, her words sharp and deliberate. "The money I thought was for Dad's health? That money?" Connor scoffed. "Don't be dramatic. It was a celebration. You should have been honored to help me." "Honored?" Madison's voice shook with rage. "You paraded around while I sat at home mourning the only pieces of family history I had left. And you think I should be honored?" Linda stepped closer, her hands raised as if to soften the blow. "Sweetheart, we didn't mean—" "Stop!" Madison's voice cracked like a whip. For the first time, the room fell utterly silent, every eye fixed on her. "You lied. You manipulated. And when I stayed quiet, you took that as weakness. But you know what?" She lifted her chin. "My silence is over." Ethan slipped his arm around her shoulders, grounding her as the ballroom erupted in murmurs of support. Guests who had heard only fragments of the story now whispered openly, disgust dripping from their voices. Robert stiffened, his pride wounded. "You'll regret this, Madison. Family is forever." Madison's lips curved into a cold, steady smile. Family should be earned, not demanded. The security team reappeared, this time flanking her parents and brother firmly. Connor struggled against their grip, shouting curses as they were led back toward the door. But his voice was drowned by the applause that suddenly rose from the crowd. Applause for Madison. Her throat ached with unshed tears, but she held them back. She had cried enough for this family. Tonight she stood tall. Tonight she let go. Ethan raised her hand to his lips, brushing it with a quiet kiss. "You did it," he whispered. Madison exhaled, the weight of years finally slipping from her shoulders. "No," she said softly, her gaze still fixed on the closing doors. "I'm just getting started." The music swelled once more, laughter returned, and the ballroom carried on, brighter than before. But for Madison, this was more than a party. It was the moment she finally reclaimed her voice and left the ghosts of her past standing on the other side of the door. The morning sun poured through Madison Carter's penthouse windows, painting golden streaks across the floor. She stood in the kitchen, sipping her coffee, the world calm around her. The cruise had been weeks ago, yet the memory of that night, the cheers, the applause, her family being escorted out, still burned sharp in her mind. Since then, silence. Not a single call from Robert, Linda, or Connor. At first, it felt like freedom. But Madison knew silence never lasted long with them. She was right. 3 weeks later, on a brisk Saturday morning, the knock came. Heavy, urgent, relentless. Ethan opened the door first, his jaw tightening at the sight. Robert stood there, his once iron posture slouched. His expensive watch was gone, his suit wrinkled. Linda hovered behind him, her makeup smudged, her eyes red from crying. Connor looked worse, angry but hollow, the glint of arrogance dulled. "Madison," Robert rasped, his voice stripped of its usual thunder. We need your help." Madison's hand froze on her mug. The room seemed to shrink. She set the cup down slowly and stepped forward, her expression unreadable. "Help," she repeated, her tone flat. Linda's voice cracked. "The money's gone. Connor, he made some bad choices. Investments that failed. We lost nearly everything. The house, the cars." She broke into sobs, clutching Robert's arm. "We have nowhere to go," Connor sneered, his pride refusing to die. "Don't act like you're better than us, Madison. You wouldn't even have this life if it wasn't for Dad. You owe us." "Owe you?" The words cut from Madison's throat like glass. Her laugh was bitter, sharp. "I sold my jewelry, my grandmother's jewelry, to pay for a fake emergency. You used it to throw Connor a birthday cruise. And now you're standing at my door demanding more?" Robert's shoulders slumped, his eyes glassy with desperation. "We're your family." "You can't just turn your back." Madison stepped closer, her gaze piercing. "Family doesn't stab you in the back while calling it love. Family doesn't rob you, then celebrate in front of the world while you sit broken. That's not family. It's leeches wearing the mask of family." Ethan's voice was steady, firm as stone. "You heard her. You don't belong here. You made your choices. Now live with them." But Madison wasn't finished. "Not yet." She took a deep breath, her voice carrying the weight of years. "Do you know what it felt like? Sitting alone, scrolling through pictures of you laughing on that deck, while I stared at empty hands where my grandmother's bracelets used to be? Do you know what it feels like to be treated like a wallet instead of a daughter? Like a servant instead of a sister?" Her mother sobbed louder, but Madison's eyes never softened. "I begged for your approval for years. I gave until I had nothing left, but all you gave me in return was betrayal. So no, this time I choose myself." Connor's face twisted, but Robert's broke. His chin trembled as he whispered, "Please, Madison. Don't let us end up on the street." Madison's throat tightened, but she swallowed the ache. She could feel the old part of her, the girl desperate to be loved, trying to rise. But she crushed it. Because love given to people who only knew how to take was nothing but self-destruction. She shook her head slowly. "You'll survive. Maybe for the first time, you'll learn what survival really feels like." And with that, she stepped back, her hand resting on Ethan's chest. He reached for the door, his eyes locked on Robert's. "Goodbye." The door shut with a final click. The silence that followed was deafening, but this time it wasn't oppressive. It was liberating. Madison leaned against the counter, her chest heaving. Ethan brushed a hand through her hair, his voice soft. "You did the hardest thing you'll ever do. You closed the door on the people who hurt you most." Tears finally spilled down her cheeks, but they weren't tears of weakness. They were release, relief, power. She whispered almost to herself, "I didn't argue that night on the balcony. I don't need to argue now. They stood outside once, and they'll stay outside forever." Ethan kissed her temple, pride glowing in his eyes. "And you'll never be alone again." Madison looked out the window, the city sprawling beneath her, vast and alive. For the first time, the weight was gone. She wasn't the forgotten daughter. She wasn't the backup plan. She was Madison Carter, the woman who had chosen her own worth over a family's poison. And as the sun blazed brighter, she knew her silence had become her loudest victory.